Savannah Miller, 28. The day my family laughed in my face at Grandpa's will reading was the day I realized blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. When I announced I'd keep his struggling bee farm instead of selling it, my parents called me delusional. They didn't know I'd discovered Grandpa's secret journal, or that their mockery would cost them millions. Family betrayal cuts deepest, but karma cuts deeper. Hey everyone! Before I dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments. And while you're there, hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy family revenge dramas, where karma delivers sweet justice. Trust me, you'll want to see how my worthless inheritance transformed not just my life but my entire family's future. The mahogany conference table at Harrison and Myers law firm seemed to stretch for miles as I sat across from my parents, Charles and Diane Miller. My brother Jacob lounged beside them, scrolling through his phone with practiced disinterest. Outside Boston's financial district gleamed in the October sunshine, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside this room. "Shall we proceed?" Mr. Harrison adjusted his glasses and broke the seal on Grandpa Theodore's will. My stomach tightened. It had been only 2 weeks since we buried him, and already the vultures were circling. I'd spent every summer at Grandpa's farm in rural Massachusetts until I was 18. Then college happened, followed by a marketing job in the city that consumed my 20s. Our visits became sporadic holidays, occasional weekends. I'd assumed there would always be more time. That familiar guilt gnawed at me as Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. "To my son Charles and his wife Diane, I leave my investment portfolio valued at approximately $250,000, Mr. Harrison read. My father nodded, as if this was merely his due. "To my grandson Jacob, I leave my collection of rare books and $100, for his continuing education." Jacob finally looked up from his phone, a satisfied smile crossing his face. "To my granddaughter Savannah Mr. Harrison continued, I leave my farm property in Berkshire County, including all structures, equipment, and the apiary business, Theo's honey." The room fell silent for 3 heartbeats before my father erupted. "The bee farm, that's it." Charles stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "That place hasn't turned a profit in 5 years, Charles," my mother hissed, pulling at his sleeve. I sat frozen, processing the news. Grandpa had left me the farm, the magical place of my childhood summers. But my father's reaction confirmed what I'd suspected: the family had been waiting for Grandpa to die, so they could sell everything. "There must be some mistake," my father continued, turning to Mr. Harrison. "The property alone is worth at least $1 million. He always said he'd divide everything equally." Mr. Harrison shook his head. Mr. Miller was very specific about his wishes. He shuffled through the papers. "There is a letter for Savannah as well." My father's face darkened to a dangerous shade of red as Mr. Harrison handed me a sealed envelope. With trembling fingers I opened it and began reading Grandpa's familiar slanted handwriting. "My dearest Savannah, if you're reading this, I've finally gone to join your grandmother. Don't be sad, I've had a good run. I'm leaving you the farm because you're the only one who ever saw it as more than just property to liquidate. Your father stopped seeing the magic in small things long ago. The bees aren't just livestock, they're teachers if you listen carefully enough. Check the old roll-top desk in my study. Bottom right drawer. The key is taped under the 3rd kitchen drawer. All my love, Grandpa Theodore." Tears blurred my vision as I folded the letter. When I looked up, 3 pairs of eyes were staring at me expectantly. "Well," my father demanded. "What does it say?" "It's private," I whispered, tucking the letter into my purse. "This is ridiculous," Jacob finally spoke. "Savannah doesn't know the first thing about farming. Or bees." "I can learn," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. My mother's laugh was like glass breaking. "Honey, be realistic. You have a career in the city. That place is falling apart, it would take a fortune to revive it. Your mother's right, my father added, his tone softening to the one he used when convincing clients to invest in doomed ventures. The smart move is to sell. We can split the proceeds. It's what Dad would have wanted. No, it's not, I countered, anger flaring. He specifically didn't leave it to you because he knew you'd sell it immediately. My father's mask of concern slipped. Don't be stupid, Savannah. That property has been nothing but a money pit since Mom died. Dad was too sentimental to see it. Like you were too busy to visit him more than twice a year. The words escaped before I could stop them. A heavy silence fell over the room. Mr. Harrison busied himself with papers, clearly uncomfortable. I've made my decision, I said, standing up. I'm keeping the farm. My family's reaction was immediate and predictable. My father called me delusional. My mother suggested I was having a quarter-life crisis. Jacob rolled his eyes and muttered something about me always needing to be different. You'll change your mind when you see the state it's in, my father said dismissively. The roof alone needs at least $30,000 in repairs. As I walked out of that office, their laughter followed me. But I didn't turn back. Something about Grandpa's letter felt like a compass pointing me in a new direction. After 5 years in marketing, creating campaigns for products I didn't believe in, I was ready for something real. Something that mattered. That evening, I drove the 2 hours to Berkshire County. The farm looked smaller than I remembered, the white paint on the Victorian farmhouse, peeling the barn roof, sagging ominously in one corner. But as I stepped out of my car, the familiar scent of wildflowers and earth wrapped around me like a welcome. I found the key exactly where Grandpa had described and made my way to his study. The roll-top desk stood by the window overlooking the orchard and the white boxes of the apiary beyond. With reverence, I opened the bottom right drawer. Inside was a leather-bound journal labeled Apiary Records, a USB drive, and a smaller envelope with my name on it. I opened the envelope first. Inside was a single key and a note, Bank of Western Massachusetts, Box 427. Curious, I opened the journal expecting to find tedious records of honey production. Instead, on the first page in Grandpa's handwriting, the secret isn't in the bees, it's in what they eat. 20 years of research starts here. I stayed up all night poring over Grandpa's journal. By dawn, I understood why he'd left me the farm. And I knew my family would regret their laughter sooner than they could possibly imagine. The next morning, armed with Grandpa's key, I drove to the Bank of Western Massachusetts. The safety deposit box contained another journal, this one older and more worn, plus several flash drives and a folder of scientific papers with complex chemical formulas highlighted throughout. Your grandfather accessed this box frequently, the bank manager informed me. Last time was just 3 weeks before he passed. Back at the farm, I plugged the first flash drive into my laptop. It contained hundreds of files, research papers on apitherapy spreadsheets, tracking experimental honey batches, and correspondence with researchers at universities across the country. The most recent email was dated just a month ago. Grandpa hadn't been running a failing honey business. He'd been conducting sophisticated research. I started with the oldest journal. The first entry was dated 20 years ago, shortly after Grandma died from complications of rheumatoid arthritis. Elizabeth is gone. The doctors couldn't help her, but perhaps the bees can help others. Today I begin. Page after page detailed Grandpa's methodical experiments cultivating specific wildflowers around the apiary, tracking which nectars produced honeys with higher concentrations of certain compounds, documenting the effects when he used the honey to treat his own arthritis pain. By the third journal, he was corresponding with a biochemist from MIT. Together, they had identified a unique combination of plant compounds that, when concentrated in honey through careful bee foraging management, showed remarkable anti-inflammatory properties. His research had progressed from personal observation to controlled laboratory testing. The most recent journal contained the breakthrough, a specific blend of native wildflowers that, when planted in precise locations around the hives, produced honey with consistently high levels of a compound they had named theodorin after my grandfather. Preliminary studies showed it dramatically reduced inflammation without the side effects of traditional medications. The final entry read patent application submitted today. If approved, Savannah will have everything she needs to build something extraordinary. Charles never understood that some things are worth more than quick profit. He'll try to take this from her when I'm gone. The deed is in her name only. The research is hidden where only she will find it. My legacy is safe in her hands. My hands shook as I closed the journal. Grandpa hadn't left me a failing farm, he'd left me a potentially revolutionary medical discovery. One that my family would have sold to the highest bidder without understanding its true value. The next morning, I called my marketing firm and resigned. My boss thought I was joking at first, then tried to convince me I was making a catastrophic career mistake. When I wouldn't budge, she reminded me that the door wouldn't remain open if I changed my mind. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt alive with purpose. That afternoon, I met with Grandpa's research partner, Dr. Eliza Chen from MIT. She arrived at the farm in a modest sedan, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that belied her brilliant mind. "Your grandfather was remarkable," she said as we walked through the apiary. "Most people would have sold this research to pharmaceutical companies years ago." "Why didn't he?" I asked. Theodore believed that medicine should be accessible to everyone. The current model of pharmaceutical development would have priced this treatment out of reach for most patients. She paused, studying me carefully. "He talked about you often, you know. He believed you shared his values." "I'd like to think I do," I said quietly. "Then you should know we're close. The patent application looks promising. If approved, we could begin production of medical-grade honey within months, not years." "My family doesn't know any of this," I admitted. Dr. Chen's expression hardened slightly. "Theodore was clear about that. He said your father would prioritize profit over patients." The truth of her words stung. My father had spent his career in pharmaceutical sales, often boasting about the market value of new drugs rather than their efficacy. He would see Grandpa's discovery as nothing more than dollar signs. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into learning everything about beekeeping. Marco, the farm manager who had worked with Grandpa for 15 years, became my mentor. A quiet man in his 50s, he had known about the research all along. "Your grandfather trusted you," he said one evening as we checked the hives. "He said you had your grandmother's heart and your own mind. That's a powerful combination." The work was harder than anything I'd done before. I woke before dawn each day, tending to the bees, maintaining the wildflower meadows that were crucial to the honey's properties, and studying Grandpa's research at night until my eyes burned. My city friends thought I was having a breakdown. My parents refused to speak to me. Only Jacob visited, arriving unannounced one Saturday, about a month after the will reading. "Dad sent me to talk some sense into you," he admitted as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the meadows gold. "And what wisdom does he think you can impart?" I asked, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Jacob had the grace to look embarrassed. "He thinks you're wasting your potential. That you're throwing away your career on some sentimental fantasy. And what do you think?" he shrugged, looking suddenly younger than his 24 years. "I think you're happier than I've seen you in ages. Different somehow." I almost told him then about the research, the patent, all of it. But something held me back. Jacob and my father had always been close. Too close. "I'm figuring some things out," I said instead. "Sometimes you have to step off the path everyone expects you to take." Jacob left that evening with a jar of honey and a thoughtful expression. I didn't know then that he would be the catalyst for everything that followed. November brought the first snow and an unexpected visitor. My father's Mercedes crawled up the gravel driveway one Sunday morning, looking absurdly out of place against the pastoral backdrop. I watched from the kitchen window as he emerged, grimacing as his Italian leather shoes met the muddy ground. "This is a surprise," I said, meeting him on the porch rather than inviting him inside. The journals and research were spread across the dining room table, and I wasn't ready to share those secrets. "Jacob said I should see what you're doing here before writing it off," he replied, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Though I can't say this looks promising." He gestured at the weathered barn and bare winter gardens. "Beekeeping is seasonal," I explained. "Winter is for planning and maintenance." He nodded absently, his gaze calculating as it swept across the property. "The land value alone has increased since Dad bought this place. With the housing development they're building, 10 miles down the road, you could get a very competitive offer. So that's why he'd come, he'd found a potential buyer." "I'm not selling," I said firmly. "Savannah, be reasonable. You've had your rural adventure, proven whatever point you needed to prove. But this isn't sustainable." I bit back a retort. "Would you like some tea? It's freezing out here." Inside, I kept him in the kitchen serving Grandpa's special honey with the tea. I watched with satisfaction as his expression changed after the first taste. "This is remarkable," he admitted, "different from what Dad used to sell at the farmer's market." "It's a special batch," I said carefully. "You could probably charge a premium for this," he mused, business instincts activating. "Artisanal, organic. Those buzzwords fetch top dollar these days." "It's not about the money, Dad." He studied me with new interest. "Then what is it about?" For a moment, I considered telling him everything about Grandpa's research, the patent application, Dr. Chen's involvement. Maybe there was still a way to bridge the gulf between us. But then his phone rang and he answered immediately, launching into a conversation about stock options and quarterly projections without even an apologetic glance my way. Some things never change. After he left, I called Dr. Chen to update her on our timeline. The patent attorney was optimistic, suggesting we might hear back within months, rather than the typical years given the promising initial studies. "Your grandfather's samples are showing consistent results in the lab," Dr. Chen confirmed. "I think we're ready to approach some smaller ethical pharmaceutical manufacturers about partnership opportunities." Everything was falling into place until Jacob showed up at the farm 3 days later, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk," he said, following me into the kitchen without waiting for an invitation. "Dad's been making calls." My stomach dropped. "What kind of calls?" "He met with a patent attorney yesterday. Started asking questions about challenging inheritance terms based on the deceased's mental competency." "That's ridiculous." Grandpa was sharp as a tack until the end. Jacob's gaze dropped. "There's more. He knows about the research." The mug I was holding slipped from my fingers, shattering on the tile floor. "How I think he had someone follow me last time I visited. I noticed a car behind me on the way back to Boston, but I didn't think." He trailed off. "Yesterday he started asking questions about what you were working on, specifically about any papers or research notes you might have shown me." Cold dread spread through me. "You didn't tell him anything, did you?" The flash of guilt across Jacob's face was answer enough. "I didn't know it was a secret," he protested. "He said he was worried about you, that you might be following some of Grandpa's more eccentric ideas. I mentioned seeing some journals and scientific papers on your table." I sank into a chair, my mind racing. "He's going to try to challenge the will." Jacob nodded miserably. "He's already consulted with 3 different lawyers, and he's been talking to pharmaceutical executives, people he knows from his sales days." I called Dr. Chen immediately. She answered on the first ring, her voice tense. "I was about to call you," she said without preamble. "I received a very interesting email an hour ago from Mendel Pharmaceuticals asking about my research partnership with Theodore Miller. They're offering substantial funding to continue our work provided all patent rights are assigned to them. Mendel was one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country, notorious for acquiring promising medications and then raising prices astronomically. They were exactly the type of company Grandpa had wanted to avoid. "My father," I said, the pieces falling into place. "He's trying to go around me. It seems that way." They mentioned speaking with a Charles Miller who claimed to have authority regarding his father's intellectual property. My hands shook with anger. This wasn't just about money anymore. My father was trying to undermine everything Grandpa had worked for, everything he had believed in. "What do we do?" I asked. "The patent application is already filed in both Theodore's name and mine," she said firmly. "Your father can't touch that. But we need to secure everything, all the research, all the physical evidence of Theodore's work." I spent that night making copies of every document, every journal entry, every email. Jacob helped his earlier betrayal somewhat mitigated by his current assistance. By dawn we had digital backups stored in multiple secure locations, and physical copies locked in the new safe I'd installed in Grandpa's study, but my father was nothing if not persistent. 2 days later, I received a formal letter from Harrison and Myers, requesting a meeting to discuss concerns about Theodore Miller's state of mind during his final revision of his will. The battle lines were drawn. My own family was preparing to declare Grandpa mentally incompetent, rather than accept that he had seen through their materialism, rather than respect his wishes, rather than acknowledge that I, not my father, had been entrusted with his legacy. That night, as snow fell heavily outside, I sat in Grandpa's study reading through his oldest journal. One passage stood out, written shortly after my 10th birthday. "Savannah spent the whole day in the fields today following the bees from flower to flower. Charles called it a waste of time, but the child understands what he never did, that patience reveals patterns invisible to those seeking only immediate rewards. She will make something beautiful of this knowledge someday." I closed the journal, resolve hardening within me. My father had underestimated Grandpa. Now he was underestimating me. It was time to show him exactly what I was capable of. By February the battle had escalated beyond anything I could have imagined. My father filed a formal challenge to Grandpa's will, claiming undue influence and mental deterioration. His lawyers requested every piece of correspondence between Grandpa and me for the past 5 years, which conveniently included the period when I had been too busy with my marketing career to visit often. He was building a case that I had manipulated a vulnerable old man. The irony was painful. The person who had barely visited his own father was accusing me of manipulation. Meanwhile, Mendel Pharmaceuticals increased their pressure on Dr. Chen, offering her a prestigious position leading their new natural therapeutics division, contingent on bringing Grandpa's research with her. To her credit, she refused, but the stress was taking its toll on both of us. "Your grandfather anticipated something like this," she told me during one of our late-night strategy calls. "That's why he was so careful with the documentation. Every experiment, every finding was meticulously recorded and witnessed." The legal fees were mounting. I had used most of my savings from my marketing career, and the farm wasn't generating significant income yet. The specialized honey production was still in the development phase, not yet ready for market. In a moment of desperation, I approached 3 banks for loans to cover legal costs using the farm as collateral. All 3 rejected my application, citing the property's uncertain commercial viability. I later learned my father had contacted each bank's loan officers before my appointments. It was during this low point that Marco, the farm manager, suggested something unexpected. "Your grandfather always said the community would be the farm's salvation," he said one evening as we worked in the honey house. "Maybe it's time to test that theory." With Marco's guidance, I reached out to the Berkshire Agricultural Association. The timing was serendipitous. They were preparing for their annual winter showcase, where small farms could present their products and stories to the wider community, including potential investors and supporters. With nothing to lose, I registered for a booth. For the next week, I worked around the clock preparing presentation materials, explaining the unique properties of our honey and Grandpa's vision for accessible natural medicine. I carefully avoided mentioning the pending patent or specific research findings, focusing instead on the broader concept and initial promising results. The day of the showcase, I set up a modest display alongside elaborate presentations from established farms. My hands trembled slightly as I arranged jars of our special honey for tasting, wondering if I was making a colossal mistake. What if my father somehow found out and used this public display against me in the legal battle? But those fears dissolved as people began stopping by. Many had known Grandpa purchasing his honey at farmers' markets for years. They shared stories I'd never heard, how he had donated honey to families who couldn't afford medicine, how he had mentored aspiring beekeepers, how he had fought against pesticide use on neighboring farms. With each story, my resolve strengthened. Midway through the afternoon, an elegant older woman paused at my booth sampling the honey with a thoughtful expression. "This reminds me of Theodore's special reserve," she said. "He only shared that with a few people." "You knew my grandfather?" I asked. She smiled. "Eleanor Fraser. I was Theodore's doctor for 15 years. And before you worry, doctor-patient confidentiality extends beyond death." Dr. Fraser, it turned out, had been helping Grandpa document the effects of his special honey on his arthritis. She had witnessed his methodical approach, his careful record-keeping, his sharp mind, even in his final months. "I'd be happy to provide a statement regarding your grandfather's mental competency," she offered. "Theodore was not only sound of mind, he was brilliant. And he spoke of you often." That unexpected encounter was followed by another. A man in his 60s wearing an impeccably tailored suit that stood out among the casual attire of most attendees stopped to study my presentation boards. "Fascinating approach," he commented after sampling the honey. "Reminds me of research I reviewed recently out of MIT." My heart skipped. "You're familiar with apitherapy research?" "Samuel Blackwood," he introduced himself, handing me a business card that identified him as the director of the Natural Medicine Foundation. "We fund promising alternative treatment research. Your grandfather submitted a grant application to us shortly before he passed. Extremely innovative work." By the end of the showcase, I had not only lined up potential character witnesses for the legal battle, but also secured a meeting with the foundation to discuss possible funding. For the first time in weeks, I felt hope rekindling. That hope was nearly extinguished the very next morning when I received a text from Jacob. "Dad knows about the showcase. He's furious. Be prepared." I barely had time to process this warning before my phone rang. Dr. Chen, her voice taut with controlled anger. "Mendel just announced a new breakthrough in honey-based anti-inflammatory treatment," she said without preamble. "The preliminary research they're citing sounds remarkably similar to Theodore's work." "How is that possible?" "They don't have access to his full methodology. They don't need it. They're a pharmaceutical giant with nearly unlimited resources. Once they understood the basic concept from whatever information your father provided, they could fast-track their own parallel research." My stomach nodded. "Can they do that legally?" "It's complicated. They're careful not to duplicate anything in our patent application exactly. They're calling it convergent research, claiming they independently arrived at similar findings." This was my father's endgame. If he couldn't control Grandpa's research directly, he would help Mendel develop a competing product, undoubtedly, with a generous consulting fee for himself. The farm, the bees, Grandpa's dream of accessible medicine, none of it mattered to him. I called my lawyer immediately, but the news wasn't encouraging. Fighting Mendel would require resources we simply didn't have. Even with the potential foundation funding, we would be outmatched by Mendel's legal team. That afternoon, as a light snow fell outside, I sat at Grandpa's desk, feeling the weight of imminent defeat. The bees were dormant for winter, the fields covered in snow, the future uncertain. Had I been foolish to think I could honor Grandpa's legacy against such powerful opposition? I was still sitting there when headlights swept across the window. A moment later, a sharp knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. When I opened it, my mother stood on the porch, her expression unreadable. "May I come in?" she asked stiffly. I stepped aside, wordlessly watching as she entered the farmhouse for the first time since Grandpa's funeral. "Your father doesn't know I'm here," she said, removing her gloves. "And I'd prefer to keep it that way." "Why are you here, Mom?" she sighed suddenly, looking older than her 58 years. "I found something in your father's office. Something you should see." From her purse, she withdrew a folder containing emails between my father and executives at Mendel Pharmaceuticals. The earliest was dated 3 years ago, long before Grandpa died. "Dad knew about the research all along," I whispered, the pieces falling into place. "He's been planning this for years." My mother nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Theodore suspected Charles was going through his papers whenever we visited. That's why he became so secretive in his final years. And you're just telling me this now?" Her gaze finally lifted to mine, shame and determination mingling in her expression. "I've enabled your father's behavior for too long. Looked the other way when his ambition crossed ethical lines. But this," she gestured at the folder, "this is too far." We stayed up all night, my mother filling in gaps in my understanding of the family dynamics. How my father had always resented Grandpa for choosing research over profit. How he had systematically tried to convince Grandpa to sell the farm for years. How he had even attempted to have Grandpa declared incompetent after a minor fall 2 years ago, only backing down when Grandpa threatened to disinherit him entirely. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness," my mother said as dawn approached, "but I am offering to help. I've faced many difficult moments in my journey with the bee farm, but this one has hit me hardest. I never imagined my own father would go to such lengths to undermine Grandpa's legacy and my future. The betrayal cuts deep, especially knowing it was planned for years. But I can't give up now. Too much is at stake, not just for me, but for all the people who could benefit from this research. Your support has meant everything during this struggle. If you're finding this story meaningful, please hit that like button and subscribe to follow my journey. I'd love to hear in the comments if you've ever faced family betrayal and how you handled it. The road ahead is uncertain, but with this amazing community behind me, I know I can find the strength to continue fighting for what's right. Armed with the evidence my mother provided, I finally had leverage. The emails proved my father had been investigating Grandpa's research without authorization long before his death, a serious breach of both family trust and potentially intellectual property laws. My lawyer's eyes widened as he reviewed the documents. "This changes everything," he said, sorting through the emails. "Mendel could face significant liability if they knowingly pursued research based on proprietary information obtained through, let's call it, questionable means." We moved quickly, sending formal cease and desist letters to both my father and Mendel Pharmaceuticals. The response was immediate, a flurry of calls from Mendel's legal department and a furious voice message from my father demanding to know what nonsense I was pursuing now. But I was done with reactive defense. The next day, Dr. Chen and I met with Samuel Blackwood from the Natural Medicine Foundation, bringing complete documentation of Grandpa's research, our patent application, and the evidence of my father's interference. "This is precisely why we exist," Blackwood said, after reviewing everything. "Big Pharma has a pattern of appropriating promising natural medicine research and turning it into expensive, inaccessible treatments. Your grandfather's approach is exactly what we want to support: effective, affordable solutions with minimal side effects." By the end of the meeting, we had secured not only funding to continue the research, but also legal support from the Foundation's experienced team, who specialized in defending small researchers against pharmaceutical giants. For the first time since the battle began, we had allies with resources that matched our opponents. My father's response was predictable escalation. He filed an emergency petition seeking temporary control of the farm, claiming I was mismanaging Theodore Miller's intellectual property and potentially destroying valuable research. The court date was set for early April. As it approached, I threw myself into farm preparations for the spring season, determined to show the judge that far from mismanaging Grandpa's legacy, I was actively advancing it. Marco and I worked from dawn until dusk, repairing hive boxes, preparing the fields for spring planting, and coordinating with local wildflower experts to expand our specialized meadows. Dr. Chen visited weekends, helping us refine the production methods based on the latest lab results. 3 days before the court hearing, Jacob arrived unannounced, looking haggard and conflicted. "Dad wants me to testify," he admitted, pacing the kitchen. "He says I should tell the judge about how you've been playing farmer, instead of properly monetizing Grandpa's research." "And will you?" I asked quietly. He stopped pacing, meeting my gaze directly. "No. I've seen what you're building here. It's what Grandpa would have wanted." His support was the boost I needed heading into the hearing. The courtroom was tense, as my father and I sat at opposite tables with our respective lawyers. My mother had chosen to sit in the gallery rather than beside my father, a silent statement that didn't go unnoticed. Judge Martinez, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, listened impassively as my father's lawyer painted me as a naive idealist, squandering valuable intellectual property out of misplaced sentiment. "Miss Miller has no background in scientific research, agriculture, or business management," he argued. "Theodore Miller's groundbreaking work deserves professional development, not amateur experimentation." When my turn came, I let the evidence speak for itself. Dr. Chen testified about the legitimacy of our continued research. Samuel Blackwood explained the Foundation's support and the importance of our approach. Marco detailed the careful implementation of Grandpa's agricultural methods. But the most powerful testimony came from Dr. Fraser, who spoke directly to Grandpa's mental state and intentions. "Theodore Miller was exceptionally clear about his wishes," she stated firmly. He believed his granddaughter Savannah was uniquely qualified to carry his work forward, precisely because she valued the humanitarian applications over profit potential. His decision wasn't impaired, it was deliberate and consistent with values he had expressed for decades. Judge Martinez's ruling came faster than anyone expected. Not only did she dismiss my father's petition, but she also issued a preliminary injunction preventing him from interfering further with the farm or research, citing the troubling pattern of behavior revealed by the evidence. Outside the courthouse, my father caught up to me, his expression thunderous. "You have no idea what you're doing," he hissed. "That research could be worth millions if properly commercialized." "Millions, it already is worth millions," I replied calmly. "Just not in the way you measure value." Something shifted in his eyes, then, not understanding exactly, but perhaps the first glimmer of recognition that I wasn't going to bend to his will. That court victory marked the beginning of transformation for both the farm and me. With legal threats temporarily neutralized and foundation funding secured, we could focus fully on development. Spring brought the bees out of winter dormancy and the specialized wildflower meadows into riotous bloom. Under Dr. Chen's guidance, we refined the production methods, achieving unprecedented consistency in the honey's therapeutic compounds. By June, preliminary clinical trials had begun at 3 university hospitals with promising early results for patients with rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, and other inflammatory conditions. Local and then regional news outlets picked up the story, featuring the bee farm breakthrough that was showing results comparable to prescription medications but with minimal side effects. I was in the honey house with Marco processing the season's first major harvest when Jacob called with unexpected news. "Mendel's stock dropped 12% today," he said without preamble. The market's reacting to those clinical trial results that were published yesterday. That wasn't our intention, I said, though I couldn't deny a small spark of satisfaction. There's more, Jacob continued. Dad's been placed on administrative leave at his firm. Apparently, several clients raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest after the court documents became public. The news should have felt like vindication, but instead I felt a hollow sadness. This family war had casualties on all sides. July brought the first official results from the clinical trials exceeding even our optimistic projections. Patients reported 60–70% reduction in symptoms, with none of the side effects associated with traditional medications. The Natural Medicine Foundation issued a press release, highlighting our revolutionary approach to treating chronic inflammatory conditions. Media attention exploded. Reporters showed up at the farm daily, eager to interview the marketing executive turned beekeeper who was disrupting the pharmaceutical industry. The story had all the elements people loved: David versus Goliath, natural medicine versus big pharma, family drama and redemption. Through it all, I tried to maintain Grandpa's vision of accessibility. When larger pharmaceutical companies approached with acquisition offers, I declined. When distributors suggested premium pricing strategies, I pushed back. The honey-based treatment wouldn't help anyone if only the wealthy could afford it. Instead, we pursued a community-supported model, partnering with patient advocacy groups to ensure affordable access, and working with small regional producers to scale production without compromising quality. It wasn't the fastest path to profitability, but it honored Grandpa's intentions. In September, nearly a year after I'd inherited the farm, I received an unexpected email from my father's personal account rather than through his lawyers. I'd like to meet. Just the two of us. No lawyers. The local diner where my father suggested meeting was a neutral territory, neither his corporate domain nor my farmland. I arrived early, choosing a booth in the corner, away from the few other patrons. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Gone was the immaculate suit and commanding presence. He looked smaller somehow, his designer clothes replaced by casual wear, his confident stride now hesitant. "Thank you for coming," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. I nodded, waiting. After all these months of battle, the ball was in his court. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, then stopped, seemingly unsure how to continue. My father, the man who always had a strategy, a pitch, an angle, was fumbling for words. "My firm asked for my resignation last week," he finally continued. "Too much negative publicity from the lawsuit. Clients getting nervous." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I took no pleasure in his downfall. He shook his head. "Don't be. It's been clarifying. Losing everything you thought defined you has a way of reshuffling priorities." The waitress brought coffee. My father stared into his cup for a long moment. "I never understood your grandfather," he said finally. "Or maybe I never tried to. To me, that farm was just an underperforming asset. The research was just intellectual property to be monetized. I couldn't see what he saw." "And what do you think he saw?" I asked quietly. "Possibility. Legacy. Something more meaningful than quarterly returns." He looked up at me. "Something I missed with you too." The confession hung between us, neither accusation nor excuse, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. "The pharmaceutical industry changes you," he continued. "Year after year of watching companies prioritize shareholder value over patient outcomes. I started seeing everything through that lens. Even family. I'd prepared for many versions of this meeting: angry denials, manipulative pleas, legal maneuvers, disguised as reconciliation attempts. I hadn't prepared for genuine reflection. "What do you want, Dad? A second chance," he said simply. "Not with the research or the business that's yours, and you're doing it right. A second chance as your father." I stirred my coffee, buying time to process his words. "That's a lot to ask after everything that's happened." I know. And I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness, just an opening. A possibility. Something in his voice, a vulnerability I'd never heard before, made me look at him more closely. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that looked remarkably like Grandpa's thoughtfulness. I can't promise anything, I said finally, but I'm willing to try. Slowly. Relief washed over his face. That's more than I deserve. We talked for 2 hours, really talked, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. He told me about his own complicated relationship with Grandpa, how he'd always felt he could never measure up to his father's integrity. How the corporate climb had been his way of proving his worth in a different arena. How somewhere along the way he'd confused financial success with actual value. I shared my fears and doubts about the farm, the weight of responsibility I felt, carrying Grandpa's vision forward, the loneliness of fighting a battle against my own family. I'd like to see it, he said as we prepared to leave. The farm. If that's okay. A week later he visited. He didn't offer advice or criticism as I showed him the apiary, the wildflower meadows, the honey house with its specialized equipment. He just listened and observed with new eyes. In the study, he paused at Grandpa's desk, running his fingers lightly over the worn wood. He used to let me sit here when I was a boy, he said softly. Said, someday I might understand what really mattered. A rueful smile crossed his face. Took me long enough. The real surprise came 2 days later, when I received a call from Samuel Blackwood at the foundation. I had a most unexpected meeting yesterday, he said. Your father came to see me with a rather extraordinary proposal. My father had offered to leverage his extensive contacts in the pharmaceutical industry, not to commercialize our research, but to help build distribution channels that would make the treatment widely accessible. Additionally, he was offering his severance package, a substantial sum, as a donation to the foundation, earmarked specifically for our work. He said it was time to invest in the right legacy, Blackwood added. When I called my father to confirm this startling development, his response was simple: I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I can help build something better going forward. If you'll let me. My mother called next, cautiously optimistic about the change she was seeing in my father. It's like waking up from a long sleepwalk, she said. We both are. By November, my parents had rented a cottage in the nearby town. My father started coming to the farm 3 days a week, applying his business expertise, not to maximize profit, but to create sustainable growth that preserved our core values. My mother, whose gardening I had forgotten from childhood, began helping with the wildflower meadows, her artist's eye for color and pattern, bringing new beauty to the therapeutic plantings. Jacob visited more frequently, sometimes bringing friends from his graduate program, who were interested in the intersection of traditional knowledge and modern medicine. He'd shifted his own studies from finance to healthcare economics, inspired by what he called the Theodore Miller model. As the first anniversary of Grandpa's death approached, I found myself sitting at his desk late one evening, reading through his earliest journal. A particular entry caught my attention. The miracle isn't in the honey itself. It's in the perfect collaboration, flowers offering nectar, bees transforming it, humans tending both. None could succeed alone. Together they create something healing. Perhaps that's the real lesson I meant to pass on. Looking out the window at the dormant winter fields, I realized Grandpa had been right in ways even he might not have anticipated. The healing wasn't just in the honey, it was in the restoration of a broken family, in the redemption of my father, in the community that had formed around our shared purpose. That night I added my own entry to the journal Grandpa had started. 1 year since you left us, Grandpa. The bees are sleeping, but your legacy grows. The medicine works. The family is healing. I think you knew all along that the farm would save us all, just not in the way any of us expected. Winter settled over the farm, a quiet pause before the cycle began again. But unlike the previous winter's isolation and conflict, this one was filled with planning and possibility. My father and I worked together developing ethical distribution models. My mother created educational materials about the healing gardens. Dr. Chen expanded the research to explore additional applications. The patent was approved in December, officially recognizing Grandpa Theodore Miller and Dr. Eliza Chen as the inventors of a revolutionary approach to inflammatory treatment. But more meaningful than any legal document was the human impact, the letters and emails arriving daily from patients whose lives had been transformed by access to effective, affordable treatment. In January, when the first pharmaceutical company approached with a 7-figure acquisition offer, my father was the one who firmly declined. Some things he told them aren't for sale at any price. Spring returned to the bee farm, bringing with it the first anniversary of my new life here. The hives hum with activity in meadows, now bursting with carefully cultivated wildflowers. What was once Grandpa's useless bee farm is now the Theodore Miller Center for Apitherapy Research, with 3 full-time researchers and a waiting list of universities seeking collaboration. My father works alongside me 3 days a week, his corporate expertise now channeled into creating an ethical business model that prioritizes accessibility over profit. My mother tends the demonstration gardens where patients and visitors learn about the healing properties of different plant species. Jacob splits his time between his studies and helping manage our growing patient advocacy partnerships. Today, watching my once fractured family working together on the land Grandpa loved, I realize this inheritance was never just about honey or medicine or property. It was about legacy values and the healing power of purpose shared across generations. You know, family karma has a way of finding balance in the most unexpected ways. Has someone in your family ever dismissed your dreams only to later see their true value? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this journey of betrayal, perseverance, and redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of family transformations. And if you know someone facing family conflict or struggling to follow their own path, share this video. Sometimes the greatest acts of family revenge are simply proving them wrong by succeeding on your own terms. Thank you for joining me in honoring my grandfather's legacy, and I hope his wisdom inspires you as much as it continues to guide me every day.